welcome to the All Things ITSM Global Podcast. I'm Kirsty McGowan, I'm here with Tristan Boot.
Hello.
Carlos Casanova.
Kirsty.
And we're speaking here with Kaz Ferris from Mercanto in Australia, who's kindly come over to the New Zealand conference.
Across the ditch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Welcome. It's always good to see you here, Kaz, and I think conferences are one of those times where we get together and you see there's a whole lot of people from the industry, from different organisations, different trainers, vendors, those kind of things. And we're sort of wondering, what you sort of see happening in the marketplace. What's changing? What's coming and going?
Yeah, I think from a vendor, from a tool vendor's perspective, a lot of the discussions that are taking place now is about business service management or enterprise service management. And there's a number of them that are on the front foot that way. And a lot of their marketing is now around use of service management out in the business, because the IT processes that have been around for a long time some are very adaptable to areas like facilities, procurement, HR, or onboarding, etc. And what we've also been hearing, where IT has often been driving that out in the business is now coming to IT and asking for that functionality and to leverage. So I think there's a big change there. The other thing we're also hearing a lot about, it's not new, it's been around a while, but obviously is supplier integration and SIAM. There's a big conversation. There's more and more organisations now are more dependent on more and more suppliers, and a real challenge for organisations is how do we deliver a seamless end-to-end service to our customer when there may be 20 suppliers all providing a part of that. So there's a whole orchestration layer that organisations are now looking at, probably overcooking it, as we tend to do in IT.
We do, we do tend to overcomplicate things that we don't need to.
But I would assume that something like that's going to be difficult for some organizations, and some maybe can't make those transitions to sort of this new model and new perspective. It's got to be difficult to maybe do that, I would expect. So is that kind of delivering some casualties along the way, do you think, from a vendor, either on the tooling or on the services side?
It probably is from some organisations. I mean, I think they've got to jump on the SIAM supplier and service integration wagon to make it happen. But you're right, I think a lot of them are struggling with it, and I think because they're looking for a framework, they're looking and they're trying to, rather than just try and keep it simple. One of the challenges to get that supplier mentality going, because we're not only talking about external suppliers, also talking about your internal service provision acting as a supplier. So the same sort of governance and overview of both internal and external, the same model. People are struggling, I think, to apply that to both.
And there's some real parallels there to the whole internal customer, those kind of things, because we all know how good we are as service management, ITIL practitioners, whatever you want to call people, as defining who the customer is. So I think that integration is absolutely key as far as I see.
And I think one of the challenges as well, and this is everyone around this table now, is just trying to define services. I mean, I talk to organisations who are still struggling to try and define and agree what a service is.
I think defining is one thing, agreeing is a whole.
So it's very, very difficult to do service integration when you haven't got that agreement on the services.
But again, a lot of those organisations are struggling because they've got somebody who's in a full-time role somewhere else. And that's a thing that they do, because you can define the service catalogue, service portfolio in half an hour and a half.
You can just do it in your spare time.
And people still aren't focusing on the true value of what that is.
Right. Well, I think we get stuck in, and I think one of the addresses yesterday was about the definition. I think it was the panel discussion. They put out a definition. Here is what the definition of a service is, and pretty much everyone that received it was like, really? That's how you do, it didn't fit. So I think that's part of the problem with maybe still trying to force square pegs, round holes kind of thing, and it just doesn't work for everybody.
When the new vital definition of a service came out, there were a lot of people shaking their heads. Well, that's not what I think a service is. So
of course,
the problem is that there's so many. It's different points of view.
Yeah, and the thing we always struggle with in IT is we're always looking at the technology.
Yes.
And we'll always define services in terms of technology and not in terms of what is it our end user, internal or external customer, is actually consuming at the end of the day.
It is that customer outcome
So that
we really need to be thinking of.
And I think that comes back to what we were saying before about the need for that integration. You know, it's I think we all agree on the need for the cultural change and understanding the people, but then having that understanding what your customers are talking, what they're saying, and having the conversations you need to have with them. And I think that's still somewhere that is limited in its implementation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you do a lot of work with central government in Australia, don't you? Kez, you've been working with them
we cross all sectors, so government, education,
and that's quite a different world to the private enterprise.
It absolutely is. And touching on the word that Tristan just used, the biggest probably challenge in a lot of government agencies, and particularly let's say military, and just leave it wide open, is that culture. You've got a command and control sort of culture that's embedded, which has a absolute place to play in out in the field, whatever. But that sort of also pervades the organisation. So you start having those conversations when you're talking about winning hearts and minds and organisational change management, when the response is, well, why do we need to do that? Just tell us to do it.
The major will tell us what he needs, and that's all it is.
Tell me, when you say jump into so high. So people will do things because they're told to, or the tools will dictate how they operate, as opposed to them understanding the reasoning behind it.
That's really funny, because I just think I've spent a number of years in education, and you have the academic culture that pervades there completely, and half the IT department think that they're academics, and actually half of them have been, generally not in an IT background. But it's interesting how you've got to look at that layer and that actual, I guess, the corporate culture of the organisation.
I think it's one thing as a consultant or a consultancy organisation that you need to be aware of. We often talk about different geographical cultures and understanding the culture that you're going into, but I think it's the same within organisations. If I'm going into a government organisation as a private enterprise, you need to establish what the culture of that organisation is, and then operate within those parameters.
One thing that I find interesting is I've also done a lot of government work back in the United States, and both military and other agencies. And what I found interesting about the military side is there is that discipline and the structure on the garrison, not on the garrison side, but on the active side, right? But yet a lot of those individuals, when they move over, that structure doesn't necessarily follow there. And it's kind of weird. So they want that command and control, but yet when there's rules and stuff in place, they don't actually take the good parts from that side that was, okay, we're going to do this, and then they circumvent them on the other side. So I just found it kind of strange when you see that, oddity, that you're like, why did you take the bad stuff and not the good, not the good stuff?
What's even better is when you get an ex-military, sort of a senior ex-military person, then thrown, in my case, into education.
Oh wow!
It's like a bomb going off, and that actually, we were talking yesterday in the opening session. We heard about communication styles and the matrix and all those kind of things. So you've got these people who are very sort of auditory. Thou shalt do this. Talking to people who are generally more introverted. Room.
And that's absolutely it. It's all about, we talk about adopt and adapt, but in terms of delivering consultancy service and training service, whatever it might be, you need to be able to do that. So to adapt your conversation, to individuals, adapt your approach in terms of the culture of the organisation. So as opposed to going in, with a lot of consultancy companies, it's cookie cutter templates. We know it doesn't work because no one size fits all.
So that sort of, I guess that ties in with what I've talked to Rob about in the past. Is people want you're asked as an organisation to go and do a maturity assessment, for instance. Whereas often a capability review might be a better way of doing it, but they're just chasing the number.
Absolutely, and I work with organisations who do that. So come and do a maturity assessment. And give us the score, capability score, and the question is, well, why? Talked to an organisation recently who, they do that every 12 months, and it's one of their KPIs that they move those figures up. So they look at the scores from the last 12 months, they pick the lowest ones, and they're the processes that they focus on. But the idea is it going to deliver a business outcome? Is the business going to feel any benefit? It could be that you could have a process that's a nice score of 3, and a real bang for the buck would to move it to 3.5 because it meets a business need. But it's numbers for numbers' sake, and it's just not delivering any value for money.
And I guess to put that into context of where we started talking about changes in the industry and that kind of thing, that hasn't changed.
No.
Yeah, and so
we keep still having the same conversations. And I think some people, they understand the conversation, but there's an expectation somewhere within the IT senior executive that they can demonstrate this scorecard that my process has matured. But in terms of talking to the business wouldn't know, what value do I get of problem management being 2.5 to 3?
Well, it's the wrong incentives. We've spoken about that. They're incenting certain behaviors, they're getting those behaviors, and then they're not understanding why the organization isn't growing. Well, you're incenting the wrong behaviors. So.
Exactly. We're not actually looking at what their business value is at the end of it.
That's correct. We're not asking the right questions. I mean, if the business said, here are my pain points, and the organisation then wanted to have something to demonstrate an improvement, so let's say the pain point was in problem management, then if you want to do a maturity assessment of where it is, because that maturity assessment will give you that gap analysis and say these are things you can improve to move the process
it's
up
very
in
targeted,
maturity.
And
but then you are you actually addressing a business need, not just a score for score's sake.
That's great. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you for inviting me.
As always.
Thank you, Cass.
Always wonderful to have you in New Zealand at our conference.
Love being here.
Across the ditch.
Yeah.